Set in Hamburg, the film begins with an orchestra group getting ready to rehearse while a mysterious truck parks in the opera house's parking lot. A bunch of terrorists emerge from the truck. As soon as the musicians begin their practice, the terrorists burst in, firing shots into the air to make their intentions clear. Right away, the authorities send a special forces squad led by John, who reminds his team to follow orders so that no innocent person is harmed. Meanwhile, the terrorists start a live broadcast to show their hostages and demand $30 million for their release. The leader of the criminals then grabs a woman, which unsettles Mato, the second in command of the squad, even though his captain urges him to remain calm. Nonetheless, the terrorist ends up shooting the woman in the head just to make an example of her. Immediately, Mato begins to fire, leaving his team no choice but to return fire and reveal their position. Some criminals try to escape but are taken down by soldiers at the exit, while Mato and John eliminate multiple enemies in the theater, with more soldiers sneaking up on the terrorists from behind. In a matter of seconds, they clear the entire area with no collateral damage. Even so, John scolds Mato for disobeying orders. In the middle of his reprimand, the captain collapses to the floor, realizing he has been wounded in the side. As Mato tries to stabilize him, a pianist gets up from the crowd and points a gun at him. It was another terrorist in disguise. Before he can activate the theater's bombs, Mato manages to neutralize him, although he fails to prevent the man from shooting John, who dies on the spot. 5 years after this tragedy, we see Mato, now retired from the special forces and living in Romania, where he works at a sawmill. Nevertheless, this quiet routine does not stop him from recalling John and the good times he had with his family. Hoping for something better, Mato quits his job and sets out for new horizons. Elsewhere in Amsterdam, an Interpol team led by Agent Shira intercepts a drug shipment linked to various crime syndicates. A criminal is watching from a distance and reports it to his boss, Savan. Meanwhile, Shira takes one of the thugs into an alley, revealing him to be Roman, an undercover agent who provided information about the shipment. Despite this, Shira expresses frustration at not capturing the leaders, but Roman notes that this operation will force them out of hiding. In the next scene, we meet Paul, a well-known businessman in the cryptocurrency field. However, when he sits down to look at his performance charts, he no longer seems so successful. We return to Mato, who stops by Amsterdam to visit Helen, John's widow, and her young daughter, Angie. Helen greets him warmly, telling him that she is now married to Paul, although she still misses John. Speaking of him, she reproaches Mato for not attending the funeral, and he replies that he feels responsible for John's death. That only saddens Helen more. She is trying to build a new life and does not want to reopen old wounds. Mato decides to leave, but Helen changes her mind and invites him to stay for a while. She even allows him to wear John's clothes, saying John would have agreed because they were like brothers. Meanwhile, Savan begins to suspect there is a mole in his organization and directs his most trusted men to find him. Later, when Paul comes back from work, he finds an unexpected house guest but accepts the situation out of respect for his wife. That night, Mato remembers a mission in Afghanistan alongside John, who, very excited, told him that his wife was expecting a child. Seeing Mato so melancholic, Paul sits down with him, lamenting the fate of soldiers who come home and have nothing to fight for. However, Mato says there is always something worth fighting for. After that, Paul expresses concern about Mato's mental state, and his wife responds that he went through many battles. In the early morning, Mato decides to pack his things, feeling like a burden. However, he finds a note from Angie taped to the door that says, "Please don't leave without saying goodbye." The next day after his morning run, Mato returns home to find Helen about to drive her daughter to school, so Helen asks him to look after her dog. Meanwhile, Paul meets with Savan in his office. Savan asks about the 15 million euros missing from Paul's bank account. Trying to hide his nerves, Paul explains that there is a small complication in the cryptocurrency market and requests one more day to fix it. He even offers to accept punishment if he fails to solve the issue. Savan, however, assures him he won't be harmed, while eyeing a picture of Paul's family. When Savan and his bodyguard Ver leave the building, we see that Roman was watching them from a nearby park, unaware that he, too, was being hunted by another criminal. Back with Mato, Helen finds him bored, tinkering with wood. so she invites him to the park where he has fun, particularly with Angie. Upon returning home, Helen encounters an anxious Paul, who only tells her he has problems with some morning calculations. At dawn, Matteo goes for his usual run. Not far away, a small tourist boat is cruising Amsterdam's canals when they bump into a body hanging from a bridge. Unfortunately, it is Roman. When Shira and her partner Fisher hear about this tragedy, they deduce that the mafia is sending them a message. Paul also senses the stench of death because, after seeing bad news about cryptocurrencies, he asks Savan for more time, which Savan does not take well. While Matteo is working shirtless in the yard, Angie asks him about his bullet scars, sparking painful memories for the soldier, though the girl comforts him with a hug. At the same time, Helen receives a call from her husband, who says he will be home later than usual. That night, Matteo goes out to dinner in the city with Helen and Angie, who gives him a drawing of her family with him included. Helen then asks him to stay longer for Angie's sake. Suddenly, Matteo is struck from behind with a bat by masked gang members who give him no respite. Angie tries to defend him, so the gang members attempt to grab her. Naturally, Matteo will not allow that, blocking the bat and jumping into their van, throwing one of them out the window. He struggles with the others, but the van ends up crashing into another vehicle. As he drifts in and out, Matteo remembers a boxing session with John when he asked John why he was still a soldier if he was about to become a father. John answered that his family includes the army and that it is the only thing standing between war and his home. When he comes to, Matteo discovers he is handcuffed to a hospital gurney. Outside, Helen and Paul speak with agents Shira and Fisher about Angie's kidnapping. Moments later, Matteo appears dragging the gurney, so Fisher frees him after concluding he is not a threat. When Matteo declares he is going to track down Angie's kidnappers, Shira reminds him that he is dealing with a consortium used to taking only abandoned girls from unknown cities. At this, Paul remains silent. Before Matteo leaves, Shira hands him her card, asking him to call if he finds Angie. Shira and Fisher then get straight to work figuring out the truth behind Angie's abduction, unaware that one of Savan's henchmen is watching them. Meanwhile, at his club, Savan is trying to keep Angie entertained, even as he considers which syndicate to sell her to. For his part, Matteo gazes sadly at Angie's drawing while recalling John asking him to be Angie's godfather and to promise he would protect her if anything ever happened to John. Determined to find her, Matteo confronts Paul, who reminds him that Savan has connections everywhere. Indeed, Paul had neglected to mention that detail, which enrages Matteo. Before Matteo can hit him, Paul confesses he owes Savan 15 million euros. Immediately, Matteo grabs John's weapons and tells Paul to call Savan to tell him they have the money. The boss agrees to an exchange for Angie in a construction zone, but as soon as he hangs up, he warns Ver it's a trap and orders them to be ready. Meanwhile, Fisher is keeping watch on Paul's house, having just found evidence that Paul is connected to Savan. Suddenly, Matteo surprises Fisher with a gun and forces him out of his car so he can go after Angie. Helen then invites Fisher inside to wait, which makes Paul nervous. Matteo arrives at the construction site and meets with some gang members who inform him they will take only the money while Angie will be freed elsewhere. Matteo reluctantly hands over the bag, but when one of them opens it in his car, he finds it is a bomb. The explosion takes out most of the criminals, while Matteo fights the rest in hand-to-hand combat. He leaves one alive long enough to interrogate him. Back at Paul's house, one of Savan's henchmen manages to slip in and threaten Helen. Fisher intervenes, pulling her aside. They fight, and Fisher is at a disadvantage. He is ultimately overpowered and stabbed multiple times. At least Helen frightens the intruder away with a gun. After a painful interrogation that nearly tears him in half, the remaining criminal tells Matteo where Angie is being held. Meanwhile, Paul ignores the wounded Fisher and slips into his car to escape, but he is caught off guard by Ver, who kills him on the spot. Soon after, Shira arrives at the house to assist Fisher, promising he will receive a medal for his bravery. Then she gets a surprise call from Matteo, who asks for backup to save Angie. Hiding in his club, Savan wonders why he has not heard from his men. In search of answers, he asks Angie about Matteo. She replies that he will come for her with everything he's got, and she's absolutely right, because at that moment, Matteo is tearing through the club, taking down guards with punches, throwing them through the air, and breaking bones. Other guards with guns appear, but Shira arrives just in time to shoot them. Matteo asks her about additional reinforcements, and she replies that she is the backup. Facing this threat, Savan escapes to the rooftop with Angie, first ordering his top henchmen, Ver and El, to stay behind. Matteo and Shira confront Ver and El, the final line of defense. To keep things fair, Shira fights El with a knife while the two heavyweights battle each other barehanded. However, Matteo's badly hurt and struggles against Ver. Shira is also struggling against El, who throws a knife at her shoulder. When it seems like the end for this heroic duo, they muster their strength and swap opponents. Even after more punches and stabbings, Matteo keeps fighting. He overwhelms El with his sheer strength and breaks his neck. Right after that, he smashes a block against Ver's head, and Shira finishes him off with a knife. Meanwhile, Savan tries to blend in on the streets, but Matteo finds him. Matteo promises to let him go if he hands over Angie, but the boss refuses and uses the little girl as cover to shoot at Matteo. Although he manages to hit him, the soldier hurls a hidden knife straight into Savan's heart, killing him instantly. Angie runs toward a dying Matteo, who tells her they will go home. Months later, we see Angie living peacefully with her mother, while Matteo sets off for new adventures on the high seas. On his journey, he does not stop cherishing Angie's new family drawing, which now excludes Paul.
If you want interesting movie recaps, like, share, and subscribe to follow us for more movie recaps.